Welcome back to a brand new video. Today we are going to be talking about Joe Burrow and Justin Herbert and which quarterback I prefer going into the 2022 NFL season. But before we hop into the content of today's video, if you guys are new to the channel, be sure to subscribe and drop a like on the video if you guys do enjoy it. We're on that road to 3,000 subscribers, so if you guys are new, be sure to hit the subscribe button. But with all that being said, let's hop into the content of today's video. Now, before we hop into the actual numbers about each quarterback and what they're able to do last season and the team surrounding them, I want to get into their play styles and what they're both best at in the NFL. Now, I'll start off with Joe Burrow, the number 1 overall pick in the 2020 NFL Draft. Burrow relies on accuracy and his brain essentially to dominate the NFL. He's a very accurate passer. He led the league in completion percentage last year with a 70.4% completion. And then, of course, his ability to diagnose defenses quickly, read the field, and know where to go with the ball is his 2 top strengths as a quarterback. Burrow doesn't have the biggest arm in the league, but he still has a very solid arm that will do just fine in the NFL. Justin Herbert has a pretty different play style from Burrow. He's got a rocket for an arm, and he likes to try some crazy throws sometimes, which relates to his 65% completion percentage. Now, don't let this confuse you. Herbert is still a very accurate passer, but his game more relies on his arm strength and all the crazy throws he's able to make. There's oftentimes last season Herbert would rip one 70 yards down the field moving to his right, and it'd be a pretty ridiculous pass that not many other quarterbacks in the league can do. As far as their individual statistics last season, they were pretty close if you really compare the numbers. Burrow completed 70.4% of his passes for 4,611 yards, 34 touchdowns, and 14 interceptions. And Herbert, on the other hand, completed 66% of his passes for 5,014 yards, 38 touchdowns, and 15 interceptions. Herbert had more touchdowns and more yards. He also played in one more game than Joe Burrow did. Burrow sat out when the Bengals had a playoff game clinched. So we can probably assume Burrow throws for another 200 to 300 yards. He probably adds in another 2 touchdowns to his total. So the numbers are very, very similar if we look at a per game basis. Now, another big factor in evaluating these quarterbacks is the environment that they are in. Now, when Joe Burrow was drafted by the Cincinnati Bengals, it was considered to be a pretty bad environment. The Bengals had a bad rep from an organizational standpoint, and nobody really believed in Zach Taylor at the time. Everyone kind of knew the Bengals' offensive line was pretty bad, and that turned out to be true when Joe Burrow tore his ACL in the 2020 season. And Herbert, on the other hand, he was going into a situation when he was drafted that seemed to be pretty decent, but nothing very special. The Chargers had let go of Phillip Rivers, who went on to play for the Colts one last season, so they're looking for a new heir to the throne. And the Chargers had some fairly decent players on the team already. I mean, Keenan Allen was already there, Mike Williams was already there. They had Derwin James and Joey Bosa on defense, so they had some building blocks on the team, but there were still many holes on the roster they had to fill. Based off of last season, the supporting cast is in Joe Burrow's favor, but it is quite close when I consider all the factors. First off, the offensive line for the Chargers was ranked by Pro Football Focus as the 10th best line in the league last year. They completely overhauled it, the Chargers did, in the offseason of 2021. They brought in Rashawn Slater in the draft, who turned out to be a stud. Corey Linsley from the Packers, who was an insane pickup for them, brought in a lot of veteran leadership and a solid play at center. Matt Filer was a really underrated pickup from the Steelers. They got him for a pretty good contract, and he turned out to be really solid at left guard. And then the right side of their offensive line was where they kind of ran into problems. Mitchell Schofield and Storm Norton kind of had up and down seasons, and we'll get into a little bit later what they did to address those issues. And the Bengals, on the other hand, had the 20th ranked offensive line according to Pro Football Focus. They got Jonah Williams back from injury, and he turned out to be a pretty solid left tackle. Quentin Spain had a pretty decent year. And outside of those 2 players, they had trouble on the right side of their line, just like the LA Chargers. But similarly to the Chargers, the Bengals did address their right side of their offensive line in the offseason. Now, as far as wide receivers go, I think it is a pretty neck-and-neck race. I'm going to give a slight edge to the Bengals because they have Tyler Boyd in the slot, and I feel like he's better than Jalen Guyton. And the Chargers really have a good duo in Mike Williams, who's a great big-bodied receiver, and then Keenan Allen, who's probably a top 10, top 15 receiver in the NFL. Now, Joe Burrow, he was reunited with his college teammate Jamar Chase last year. And let me just say, I was wrong about that pick. I thought the Bengals should have taken Sewell because they really needed some offensive line help, but it turned out Jamar Chase was the right pick. He is a stud, and he came in and already is a top 10 wide receiver, in my opinion, in the league. And then T. Higgins really emerged and took another step this past year. Having Jamar Chase take all the number one receivers kind of helped him out and helped him blossom. So I think the Bengals have some better receiving corps, but it is pretty close. I do think the Chargers have a fairly good receiving room. And then we get to running backs, and I really think it's kind of a wash. Austin Eckler has been amazing for the Chargers since he's entered the league. He took in a more bell cow role for LA last year. He carried the ball the most he ever has in his career. And then on the other side, the Bengals have Joe Mixon, who had his career year as well. And I think both of them are really awesome backs, definitely top 10 in the league. And as far as skill position goes, both these guys had great weapons out of the backfield and out wide. And all they really needed to do on the offensive side of the ball was fix up their offensive line. And the Chargers really had to address their defense this offseason. And the Bengals, they had a pretty solid unit towards the end of the year last year and into the playoffs, but they did a little work on their secondary to kind of shore that up. That ultimately was the weak point for the Bengals in the Super Bowl on their defense. So they really went out and addressed that. But this offseason, the Chargers really made an important emphasis to improve their defense, which really held them back last season. They started off free agency with a massive 5-year, $82.5 million deal for J.C. Jackson, who's one of the better cornerbacks in the league. And then they also traded a 2nd-round pick and a 6th-round pick to the Chicago Bears for Khalil Mack, getting 2 cornerstone pieces on that defense. A great pass rusher to go opposite of Joey Bosa, and then bring in J.C. Jackson, who can play with the young Asante Samuel. And to help that offensive line, they took Zion Johnson with their first pick in the draft, who will play right guard for them this season. And that really patched up a lot of holes on their football team. They really had trouble stopping teams last year on offense. They usually had to score 30, 40 points to win. They got in a lot of shootouts. And that ultimately was the reason they didn't make the playoffs last year. And then the right side of their line, they really need to address that, and that is what they did with their first pick. The Bengals, on the other hand, did most of their offensive line work in free agency. They brought in former Dallas Cowboy tackle La'el Collins on a 2-year, $20 million deal, essentially. And then they also brought in Alex Kappa, the former Tampa Bay Buccaneers guard, on a 4-year, $40 million deal. So they brought in 2 proven veterans that would definitely help out and improve the right side of their offensive line. And in the draft, they really focused on their secondary. Their first pick was Michigan safety Dax Hill. And I wonder if they had thoughts of Jesse Bates leaving when they made this selection. I don't know if the Bengals are going to break the bank to pay Jesse Bates. So that's something I would definitely look into if I was a Bengals fan. Maybe Dax Hill replaces Jesse Bates after this season, or maybe he really excels and they have a great tandem back there and they somehow find a contract resolution with Jesse Bates, who is on the franchise tag. Now, after giving some backstory on the environment both quarterbacks are in, their past season, and what the teams did to fix their holes, I think the better quarterback of these two going into the 2022 season is Joe Burrow. And the reason I believe that is I think they had fairly similar environments last season as far as offensive weapons and skill positions go. But Joe Burrow took his team to the Super Bowl, and I think that matters in evaluating quarterbacks. Of course, it is a team game. Not one player can do anything themselves. But I think regardless, if a quarterback brings his team to the Super Bowl, I think that they should get the nod over somebody who hasn't, sniffed the playoffs yet if you're comparing similar numbers. And I think solely just because Burrow got the Bengals' first playoff win in 31 years, and he had such an unexpected run to bring them to the Super Bowl, I think that counts for something, and that is why I would take Burrow over Herbert going into next season. And I don't want to take anything away from Herbert now that he has some solid players on defense, which should make that unit a lot better. I think that the Chargers have a real shot to make the playoffs this year and make some noise. And I think if Herbert does make the playoffs, he does win a game or two, I think you can definitely reopen the conversation and really consider taking Herbert over Burrow. Just basing it off of a great season for both of them and Burrow just taking his team a little bit farther, I think right now he should get the nod for the better quarterback going into the 2022 NFL season. But let me know what you guys think of Burrow and Herbert and who you would take going into the 2022 NFL season. And be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you guys are new. But anyway, thank you guys so much for watching the video, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.